Okay, so once again, last week we did the first 4 folds of the Eightfold Path. And of course, this is, again, the primary method that the Buddha taught for how to overcome our ignorance so that we can find the true, lasting happiness of enlightenment. Of course, we can get little bits of happiness in our day-to-day lives. My favorite example, of course, is buying a new car. But then after a while, that happiness wears off. Anything in our lives is like that. We get a little happiness from it for a while, maybe, and then afterwards there's none. So it's really only in enlightenment that we have the complete, perfect, lasting happiness that we're actually looking for. I like to point to the image of the Buddha. If we look at the statue, he's got this smile on his face. Buddhas never frown. They have no reason to. Even when a Buddha is looking at us, even when they're looking at us and our ignorance, and seeing all the many ways in which we cause ourselves suffering, they still have no reason to frown because they see the Buddha nature within each of us. And they know that we're going to get there eventually. So let's begin. So right livelihood, number 5 here. And I've listed avoiding trading in weapons, avoiding slave trading and prostitution, and avoiding manufacturing or selling intoxicants. These are the 3 things that I saw listed when I studied this in the past. And basically what we're doing with livelihood is we're avoiding livelihood work that causes harm to others. This thing here about slave trading might actually seem outdated, but in fact there are parts of the world where this still happens. In Europe even, there are kids from sometimes that are taken and forced into becoming pickpockets, stealing, or even forced people, children and adults, forced into prostitution and things. This is a kind of slave trading. So this kind of thing actually still happens. Human trafficking, I think, is what they call it now. You see this on the news, human trafficking. And this is sometimes what they're talking about. Sometimes they're talking about moving illegal immigrants across borders and things, but this is often what they're talking about. So this is still very real. But this one here, avoiding trading in weapons, I struggle with this one a little bit because then you might think, well, what about people in the military? They use weapons, right? But then I believe I've mentioned the story of the Buddha in the past. Before he actually became the Buddha, he was on a ship with 500 merchants who were traveling and trading and making money. And he wasn't a perfectly enlightened Buddha, but he was a bodhisattva at the time, so he had some clairvoyance. He could read the minds of others, and so he knew that there was one bad guy on the ship whose plan was actually to kill all of the other merchants and steal their money. So a perfectly enlightened Buddha has perfect, skillful means. They would know perfectly what to say or do in order to prevent that harm from happening. But the Buddha didn't quite know what to do, or the Buddha to be didn't quite know what to do. And so the best he could come up with was to kill the robber to prevent him killing all these other people. So out of compassion, in this particular case, the Buddha took on the negative karma himself of killing in order, A, to save the lives of these other merchants, and also to protect that thief from committing the horrible negative karma of killing 500 people. So it's also said in this story that at the end of this bodhisattva's life, again, the Buddha to be's life, he died, and because of that negative karma that he willingly took on, he was born in hell, but only for a moment. And then he died in hell immediately and was reborn in a higher realm. So, yes, there is negative karma associated with any kind of aggression that we engage in. But sometimes a bodhisattva, out of compassion for others, will willingly take on that negative karma in order to prevent greater suffering. So I think we can say, of course, people in the military, not all of them are using weapons. Many of them are doing other kinds of work. And often we send out our military, particularly from the US, to go and do humanitarian work and things like that. But I think that we can look at it in this way, that these are people who are putting their own lives on the line and taking on, they might not see it this way, particularly if they're not Buddhist, but they're, you know, taking on really this negative karma to prevent greater harm. Let's think for a minute about what could be right livelihood. So here we've talked about wrong livelihood. Right livelihood is described in negative terms. So we want to avoid trading in weapons, avoid slave trading and prostitution, and avoiding manufacturing or selling intoxicants. So what would be some examples of right livelihood then, actual right livelihood? Does anyone have a thought? So what would be an example of actual right livelihood, a positive job that someone could do?
Like a doctor?
Yeah, being a doctor, a teacher.
Or Peace Corps volunteer, I guess.
Peace Corps volunteer, yeah. So there are all kinds of livelihood. In fact, most of you are probably engaging in right livelihood and you don't even know it, because maybe you didn't think about it in those terms. I think if you're working in business, it can be right livelihood if you're being honest with your customers and you're really trying to be of benefit to people. Then, you know, even working in business can be right livelihood. So these would be some examples. And also, I wanted to point out too that right livelihood is really a kind of right action. Normally, we could think of this, we could put this under number 4, right action, but because we spend so much time engaged in our work, the Buddha actually pulled this out, because so much of our daily activity revolves around our work. Okay, so this is right livelihood. Then we have right effort. So this is making an effort to avoid the arising of harmful thoughts, words, and actions, and making an effort to instead cultivate skillful, compassionate thoughts, words, and actions. So right effort is putting our effort into the Dharma in order to have the skill to know what's harmful and what's skillful, what will lead us towards suffering and what will lead us away from suffering. We really need to study the Dharma. So this is part of right effort, studying the Dharma and then applying that knowledge, so that when we're going about our daily lives and then, you know, we're dealing with someone at work and they just are stupid and won't listen to us, you know, instead of thinking that, we can stop and take a deep breath and try to figure out what the problem is. This is right effort. So I think this explanation, though, is pretty clear. Making an effort to avoid the arising of harmful thoughts, words, and actions, and then doing the opposite. Instead, trying to cultivate compassion in our thoughts, words, and actions. Compassion and wisdom. Okay, so then we have right memory. And I've got a number of different translations that I've seen for this over the years. Right memory, awareness, attention, or mindfulness. So this means remaining aware of the body, of the feelings, of the mind and mental qualities. And remembering in every moment what leads to suffering and what leads to nirvana. It's just maintaining that awareness. So much of our day we go about blindly, right? I did this today. I was down in Anaheim this morning, and on the way back, I realized at one point that I wasn't sure what highway I was on because I was thinking about something. This is how we go through much of our day, on automatic pilot. Luckily, I wasn't lost. I've done that before on the highways here in Los Angeles. I think I'm going north and I'm going south. Or I think that I turned on the 605 and next thing I know, I'm in the middle of nowhere on the 5. I don't know where I am. I've done this more than once.
Sometimes you're driving, but your mind...
That's exactly it. Or you're driving to work in the morning and it's a relatively short trip probably, and you've done it 1,000 times, and you know that you left your house and then suddenly you arrive at work and you think, how did I get here? Okay, that's not right mindfulness. So being aware in every moment. And the reason why it's important to know what we're doing with our body and what we're actually feeling, and knowing what's happening with our minds, is so that we can then apply the Dharma. If we're on automatic pilot and we're not really maintaining this awareness that we're on this Buddhist path, then that's when, you know, someone says something or does something and we might snap at them and then create a bigger problem because we're not being mindful. We're not maintaining this awareness. And so in meditation, actually, we begin cultivating this awareness. Hopefully, the idea is that, you know, we're doing meditation, and when we're done meditating, that doesn't mean we're done. Buddhist practice isn't done in 30 minutes a day or an hour a day. Buddhist practice is every moment of the day. That's Buddhist practice. So meditation, when we're doing meditation, first we calm the mind, right? And then we begin to notice, well, we're learning concentration right now by focusing on the breath at the tip of the nostril, right? Of course, there are different kinds of meditation that we can do. But we begin to notice, well, my body's feeling tense. Or, this has happened to me in meditation. I go, I think I'm feeling frustrated a little bit, like this subtle kind of annoyance or frustration. I'm in just kind of a mood, like I got up on the wrong side of the bed, and I don't know why. So I begin to notice what's happening with my mind, what my body feels like, and then I can start to apply the Dharma. If I don't have that awareness, I can't put the Dharma into practice. So this is why this is so important. So again, my point was that in meditation, we begin to see what's happening with the body, what's happening with the mind. We see what is skillful. If we're heading in a skillful direction, a wise and compassionate direction, or not. And then when we get up off the meditation cushion and we go about our lives, we begin applying that awareness to our daily lives. I think a lot of people, we talk about this sometimes in America, not just in Buddhism, but in religion in general. People like to put religion in a box. You go to church or the temple or whatever on Sunday, and then you put it aside and you just go do whatever during the week. But really, for Buddhist practice, it's every moment. The whole point of Buddhist practice is to change how we're living our lives, how we see the world, and how we act in it. So then we come finally to right concentration, which I've also seen translated as right contemplation, right meditation. This word meditation is a little bit vague, though. Now, historically, if we look at some of the earliest sutras, which we find in the East Asian canon, the East Asian collection of sutras from the Chinese tradition, they're called the agamas, right? This is what we chant Monday through Thursday here in the evening. We're chanting sections of the agamas. There are similar sutras in the Pali canon. They're a little bit different though. I asked one of my professors at the university how much of these agama sutras and the Pali canon suttas, how much overlap is there? And he said he was guessing, but maybe 60 or 70%. So there's a lot of overlap between them. So in these early sutras, when the Buddha's talking about right concentration, it's defined specifically as engaging in the 4 jhanas. The word jhana is, in this context, is often translated as absorption, because you're completely absorbed and completely focused on that practice. Now this is a sort of an interesting side note. The word jhana is in Pali. This is the language that Theravada Buddhists use for their suttas, for their sutras, right? This is the Buddhism of Thailand, Burma, Laos, Cambodia, a little bit in Vietnam, Sri Lanka as well. The word for jhana in Sanskrit is dhyana, D-H-Y-A-N-A, dhyana. So when this word and this practice of meditation went to China, they pronounced it channa. And then it was shortened to chan, which in Korea is pronounced son. In Japan, it's zen. And in Vietnamese, I'm gonna... Tien, yes. I can't do the tone. What is the tone? Tien. Yeah, T-H-I-E-N. But how do you do the tone for it? Tien. 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 Okay. Tonal languages confuse me. So, so in Vietnamese it's Tien. Now originally, so it would appear that originally when we're talking about Channa in early Chinese Buddhism, they're talking about practicing these 4 jhanas. And I've asked the Vietnamese monks here, do you learn this in the monasteries in Vietnam? Because the monks learn meditation in the monasteries. They said, yeah. This is what we learn. I'm kind of wondering if that's not some influence from Theravada Buddhism, because Theravada Buddhists will often still practice these. Not always, but often. Because in Chinese Buddhism, these 4 absorptions, these 4 jhanas have not been taught for 1,500 years-ish. So the word dhyana that became channa, that became chan, came to mean something different. Like Zen, right? It came to mean something different. Now I don't have a lot of detail about these 4 jhanas. I'm taking a class now at the university on meditation in the early Buddhist tradition. And we're just starting to learn about these. And it's because the different forms of Buddhism that I've been exposed to have all been, it's either been Tibetan Buddhism or East Asian Mahayana. We don't talk about the 4 jhanas. In fact, Tibetan Buddhism specifically rejects them. Tibetan Buddhism says they're not a path to enlightenment, and so they don't use them. I think maybe they use the first one actually. But basically these 4 jhanas, you begin cultivating joy and rapture. Do you know this word rapture? Rapture is kind of like overwhelming joy. It's just like that's what I think of it as, a completely overwhelming joy. But then you get up to a point where you calm down, you settle down into equanimity. That's what you do in the last of these 4 absorptions, these 4 jhanas. And part of the reason for this is that we have so much attachment in our ignorant minds. So we're partly showing the mind that there's something much better. There's better happiness than anything that we can find in the things in the outer world that we're constantly grasping onto. The happiness that we can find in a fun job, the happiness that we can find in material things, all of that is nothing compared to the joy and rapture that we can develop within our own minds. So it makes it easier for us to let go of these attachments. That's part of the idea. Personally, I think it's also to make meditation enjoyable. We train the mind to enjoy sitting and letting go of all our crazy thoughts. Sometimes what happens with people when they begin meditation is they force themselves to sit, even though their mind is saying, get up, get up, get up, stop, 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 I hate this, I hate this. And all they're doing is training their minds that sitting on the cushion is something to hate and avoid. And so then they don't want to sit, and they give up meditation practice. There was a time, maybe when I was in high school, and I had been trying to meditate, and I remember being frustrated with it, and walking by my meditation cushion one day, and I looked at it, and I just went, ugh. I didn't want to do it. And so I stopped meditating for a long time. And then I tried a little bit, and I stopped, and I tried a little, and I stopped. So partly, I think one of the benefits, I don't know if this is said in any text that this is one of the benefits, but my personal opinion is that one of the benefits of developing these jhanas is that you teach the mind that meditation is something to enjoy. But eventually you have to leave, you work on the first jhana, this first level, and then you leave part of it behind. There are parts of it that you drop away. And then you go to the second one, and there are parts that you drop away, and then you go to the third one, and then you calm the mind down. You let go of this, wow, joy, rapture feeling. You let go of that, and then you sit quietly in equanimity with a calm mind. So, in any case, this is what right concentration is about partly. I've got a couple of other notes here. So it's also any state of concentration rooted in the previous 7 folds of the path. That's also right contemplation or right concentration, right meditation. So then, if we're sitting and we're doing meditation and we're contemplating nirvana or we're contemplating karma, we could also call this right concentration. For example, And then we can develop this concentration through focusing on breathing, through focusing on an object, or through focusing on a mantra. So here we're focusing on breathing, again, at the tip of the nostril. Sometimes people focus on an object, and that could be a physical object, which I think is a more modern practice. Sometimes people will look at a candle flame, and they'll try to focus on that physical object. They'll look at an image, like a painting. They'll have something in front of them, a picture on the wall, and they'll focus on that, and then they'll try and perfectly mirror that in their minds. Or they'll just use from the beginning a mental object, an image of something in their minds. So before, when we were doing that Tibetan meditation, the sending and taking meditation, where we were breathing out good health and well-being in the form of light, and then breathing in as smoke the suffering of others, this would be meditating with an object, but it's a mental object. And then there's also using mantra. At this temple, we normally chant Namo Ayidafat, right? So if we're calming the mind, Namo Ayidafat, Namo Ayidafat, Namo Ayidafat, then we're doing right concentration from this definition. Of course, if we're doing Namo Ayidafat, Namo Ayidafat, Namo Ayidafat, and then we're thinking, I really want a tuna fish sandwich. I can't stand it that it's so hot here. That's not right concentration. So we have to be careful that in our practice, we're not going through the motions. We all do that sometimes. I guarantee you. I remember coming in here one time to do this program for the chanting, and I'm hitting the moktak, the wooden fish, and then I stopped too soon, or I started to stand up after doing the Heart Sutra, and I went, oh wait, not yet, So yeah, we all have bad days. But basically, these are the 8 folds of the Noble Eightfold Path. So I hope you found these last couple of sessions useful. So I'd like to stop here and see if you have any questions before we go on to meditation. Yes?
Could you explain about the meditation different with yoga?
Different with yoga. Ooh, okay, that's interesting. It depends on how you define yoga. Usually in America, when we think of yoga, we think of people, in some studio somewhere who've paid a lot of money to, stretch and sweat and all of that, right? But that could be a kind of meditation. We do like samhui here, we're bowing, right? This is very physical. This can also be meditation. But then, I'm not an expert in yoga, but as I understand it, meditation, like sitting meditation is also part of yoga. But their techniques might be a little bit different. How they're going about it might be a little bit different. So meditation is, I'm sorry, your question was what's the difference between meditation and yoga? I would say yoga can be a kind of meditation, or at least it includes meditation. And then our meditation, particularly when we're doing it very physically, someone from a yoga perspective might say, well, that's like yoga. So I think there's a lot of similarity. But then there are higher practices in the Tibetan tradition that are called yogas. In English, we call them yogas, like the 6 yogas of Naropa. And one of them, I maybe joked about this with you in the past, one of them is called dream yoga, where you're actually learning to dream lucidly, that is, be aware in your dream that you're dreaming. And then you try to learn to control your dreams. And then the reason for doing that is so that you can practice all day when you're awake, and then at night when you're dreaming, you can even practice the Dharma in your dreams. And in your dreams, you can do anything. You can manifest 100,000 copies of yourself and have everybody bowing to the Buddha. So this is considered a good way to practice. So it kind of depends on how you're using the term yoga. I think there's a lot of overlap. To answer your question, there's a lot of overlap between yoga and meditation. But yoga, usually when we're talking about yoga in the States, it comes more from the Hindu tradition rather than a Buddhist one.
If the one is studying Kung Fu and another one is exercise.
I'm sorry?
I said one is study Kung Fu and another one do exercise.
Yeah.
mean Tai Chi?
Tai Chi or something, yeah.
About energy.
Yeah, Tai Chi could be a form of meditation. Kung Fu could be a form of meditation. It depends on how you approach it. I think if you're approaching martial art practice because you want to learn how to break people's bones, because you enjoy that, maybe that's not meditation.
Yoga is the part of exercising, for your body is like moving, is soft.
Yeah, that's the physical side of it. That's so the physical side of yoga would be to have greater strength and flexibility and everything.
Strength,
Right. But then there's the meditative side as well. Yes?
I have a question. It's go back to last week for the number 4, is right action, and the first one is avoiding killing. Apparently there's some religious organizations that they are totally against abortion. I would like to know a little bit more about what the point of view of Buddhism to think about in terms of abortion.
Okay, so in terms of right action and avoiding killing, then we're talking about what about abortion? That's a very good question that is debated a lot. I think one of the different things in Buddhism is that there's no central authority making that determination for any of us. The responsibility for making right decisions is really ultimately on us. I think that, and this is my opinion, so in other words, there isn't one Buddhist opinion on this issue. So I can tell you what I think, if you want to know what I think. Okay, so I'll tell you what I think. I think that there are cases like rape and incest where there may be more damage to the mother psychologically, or if it's a little girl, physically also it can be dangerous. Maybe the most compassionate thing to do would be to end the pregnancy. That's up to the individual to determine that. I think if people are behaving irresponsibly and then someone has an abortion, there's maybe more negative karma associated with that. But as Buddhists, we never, ever, ever get up in someone's face and say, you've done this or you've done that, you're going to go to hell. We never do that as Buddhists because, who am I to say what someone is going through, particularly in a difficult situation like that? So I would say our response to this should be compassion. Our response to everything should be compassion. And if we feel anger and hatred arising in our minds, and frankly we see a lot of this, the anti-abortion movement, even sometimes on the other side, the people who are supporting reproductive rights or abortion rights, there's lots of anger and hate going back and forth. We need to not indulge that. But there is no easy answer to this. There's no easy answer. So I think the individual who finds themselves in that situation, or the two people, if the man is involved, they need to decide for themselves what is the most compassionate thing to do. Yes, very good question, thank you. Yes?
What about euthanasia?
What about euthanasia? That's another one that is debated a lot, even in Buddhist circles. Abortion is debated, so is euthanasia. I don't know, actually. And again, there's no central Buddhist authority saying do this or do that. I honestly don't know. And I think in that situation we need to, again, try to apply compassion. So, if my parents are ever on life support, then I really have to ask, do I want the life support to continue for them or for me? What is the most compassionate thing for my mom or my dad? That's the question that I would be asking in that situation. If they're in pain maybe and there's no meaningful chance of recovery, I would say the most compassionate thing that I think I would do for my parents is to turn off that switch. I know for myself, if I'm ever in that situation, I want that switch turned off. Because if I can't do anything more in this life, if I'm brain dead or something and I can't do anything more in this life, it's time to go. So I think, again, that the question there is, what is the most compassionate thing for that person about whom we're considering, whether or not to turn off their life support or not?
So in short then, is what is the most compassionate for the other individual rather than, like you said, how I feel myself, like you're using the example of your parents rather than what your family or your brothers or sibling wanted is more for the parent.
Right. Well, it's difficult if other family members are involved. It can be very difficult. But if it was just up to me, the question I would be asking myself is, well, what would my parents want? What's the most compassionate thing for them? What will cause them the least suffering? That's the question I think that we need to ask. But there's no easy answer to that either. Actually, a very compassionate thing that all of us can do for our families is to create a living will. Do you know what a living will is? Yeah, so it's a will in which you spell out what you want done should you be in a situation where it's not clear what to do. If you're on a ventilator in the hospital, what do you want done? And then that answers a lot of questions for the doctors and nurses and for your family members. And spell out very clearly, put it in writing, what you want done. Yes, I want a feeding tube. No, I don't want a feeding tube. And when I'm dead, I want to be cremated or I want to be buried, all of these things. Put this in writing and make sure your family members know about it. If you have to go to the hospital, make sure the hospital knows about it. This is a compassionate thing that we can do for our families and the medical staff. Good questions, difficult questions. There are other questions? Yes?
During the period of the time that Buddha was meditating before he became enlightened, what did he think? What he was thinking?
I wish I knew. So the question was, what was the Buddha thinking? What was going through his mind when he was meditating before his enlightenment? Well, actually, when he first set out on the path, when he left his home life and he went into the forest to practice meditation, he practiced with different meditation masters, and so he was learning different kinds of concentration, and he kept realizing, well, this isn't enlightenment. Okay, so I can concentrate in this particular way, or I can do these wild things with my mind, but this isn't enlightenment, and so he would leave and go to another teacher. And finally, he left them all behind because he realized the kinds of meditation that all these other teachers were teaching wasn't really leading anyone out of the cycle of suffering, out of ignorance, out of the cycle of birth, old age, sickness, death, and rebirth. And that's the burning question that he had. So he went off on his own and discovered the 4 jhanas, among other forms of meditation. But that last night, before the Buddha woke up, he was sitting under the Bodhi tree. And the legends we have say that Mara, the Lord of Illusion, sent all sorts of demons to attack him, sent his pretty dancing girl, his daughters, pretty dancing girls to distract him. Really, we don't have to take Mara as a literal being. Mara represents the delusion of our own minds. So he had his last battle, so to speak, with the attachments and delusions in his own mind. So that's what tradition tells us was happening with the Buddha. But he fought off all these delusions, all this ignorance, and woke up. Yeah. Yes?
How many Buddhas are there?
I don't know that either. 2 difficult questions today. I think there are some later ideas that arise in the Buddhist tradition that say that there were a certain number of Buddhas before Shakyamuni Buddha. Shakyamuni Buddha is the historical Buddha for our time. I think 7. There were 7 previous Buddhas, but different Buddhist traditions recognize all different kinds of Buddhas. There's really no way for us to know for sure. Well, this is interesting. Kwanam Botat, Avalokiteshvara, was originally male. The original form of Quan Dambotat is male. But when Buddhism went to East Asia, this idea of the bodhisattva of compassion became mixed with a Chinese folk goddess of mercy. But it's also said that Avalokiteshvara can appear in various forms, 30 some odd forms, and among them, at least 2 or 3 of them I think are female. But there are also animals and things like that too. So the most popular form of Quan Ambotat is, in East Asian Buddhism, is this female form. And then in the Tibetan tradition, there are some other female bodhisattvas like Tara. The Sanskrit word for her is Tara. She's a wisdom bodhisattva. Of course, all the enlightened beings, all the bodhisattvas have both compassion and wisdom. And there are actually 21 forms of Tara, each with their own color and their own purpose and attributes. But I'm going to be blunt. I think this is a failure in the Buddhist tradition, that we don't really recognize fully enlightened female Buddhas.
Discrimination.
Yeah. I think this, I'll say this flat out, and there are more conservative monks who might not like this, but if we look at some of the earliest texts in the Buddhist tradition, there's something called the Therigatha. The Therigatha is stories of the elder nuns, and these are stories of nuns from the time of the Buddha. And I haven't studied this in detail, and I'm trying to remember now. I think there's a story of a woman who was brought to the Buddha who was psychologically in such pain that she couldn't function. She was like sort of curled up like a ball. And the Buddha, they brought her to the Buddha, and the Buddha realized, he said, you know, I really can't help her, so take her to this nun. And so then they took her to this nun, and the nun held her in her arms, and the woman began to like uncurl. She was all like this, and then she just began to relax, and this nun was able to help her. There's a case in the Therigatha where the Buddha basically says, this nun is equal to me in terms of her knowledge of the Dharma and her ability to teach. So if we look at the sutras, there's all this information, though, this contradictory information. In one place, the Buddha says women are perfectly capable of enlightenment. And there's another place where the Buddha says, no, they're not. It contradicts. And there are sort of degrees in between. My personal opinion is that it would have taken someone with the charisma of the Buddha to get the idea out there in India at that time, where women were literally property. There are even some places in remote villages today where you hear stories of, in India, of women whose husbands die, and they sit on the funeral pyre alive with their husbands and burn themselves to death. This used to be quite common. I have a friend from Nepal, he's a professor at the university, and he says even now, every now and then, it's technically illegal, but every now and then you hear a story like this happening. So in a time when women were literally the property of men, I think it would have taken someone with the power and charisma of the Buddha to get the idea out there in the culture that women were capable of enlightenment. In fact, it was a radical idea. Having an order of nuns was a radical idea. Women did not renounce the world and live this monastic life. No one else was doing that. So I think what happened is later generations of less enlightened disciples could not wrap their heads around the equality that the Buddha most likely taught. And so a lot of the misogyny, this discrimination against women that we see in the written tradition and we see practiced in Buddhism around the world, is the failure of unenlightened people. I don't think it's the Buddha's teaching. My personal opinion is that if you're human, and you've got the drive for enlightenment, and you've got enough intelligence, you have the mental ability to reflect upon your actions and thoughts and things, you have the ability to wake up. So, and that's not just my opinion because I'm a liberal American. I am kind of a liberal American, but that's not, it's based in looking at the Buddhist tradition, looking at the sutras and seeing all these contradictions, and then thinking logically about it. And logically, I think the Buddha taught equality. in terms of our ability to become enlightened, I genuinely believe that the Buddha taught equality.
Even all sentient beings.
Yeah.
All kinds of sentient beings too.
Yeah, well, we're definitely all equal in the sense that we all have the Buddha nature, and that as long as we're ignorant, we're all suffering. But as human beings, we can become enlightened. We can get out, we can overcome that ignorance and get out of this cycle of suffering. And I don't think it matters whether you're male or female. Yes. Okay, let me double check the time here. Oh, it's almost 4 o'clock. Okay. So thank you for your questions. Oh, and I wanted to announce, I will be gone the 14th through the 16th of October. It's a Friday through Sunday. So we're actually going to cancel the program that day. I'll actually be back in the afternoon, but frankly, I think my brain will be oatmeal by that time. I don't think I'm going to be able to be awake, and then I have schoolwork to do. So the weekend, so October 16th, I think it is, there will be no meeting that day. So we'll bump the program back 1 week. So instead of ending on November 6th, we'll end on November 13th, I think it is, the following Sunday. And I'll fix the sign and I'll make sure to announce it again later. Okay, thank you.